From the Sky News Centre, this is Paul Murray Live.
Thank you, gang. I appreciate you being here tonight. A lot to get to. Now, as you know, the cost of power in Australia has been a massive issue for years, but particularly in focus in the past couple of years because, as we know, we were promised a whole lot more than what we ended up getting. But to have as many people polishing for the government as they do currently in the media, as you know, headlines came out today, details very different.
Surging power prices appear to have finally stalled, with the energy regulator forecasting a slight dip. For the average household, the reduction will be about $50 a year.
But power bills are set to drop from July. The energy regulator revealing benchmark prices that will see households save around $50 a year and small businesses even more.
All right, but let's actually have a look at the detail. Because, according to the actual offering, you can see that while there is a headline number here, it only really applies to one part of the country. Let me try to explain. Again, via the Nine website, this was their breakdown of the draft announcement today. And under the draft, residents in Sydney, Newcastle and the Hunter on the default offer will now pay between 3 and 3.5% less for electricity from July the 1st. Now, this is good, but let's not pretend that this is touching the sides or going anywhere near reversing the increases that have been around for the past couple of years since this government came to power. Meantime, people in the Illawarra and South Coast, their bills go down by 1.9 to 7%, and in South Australia they're going to get a decrease of a massive 0.5. Massive 0.5, or maybe 2.5%, depending on if you happen to be in the right place and maybe even potentially in a small business. Now, what about in Melbourne? The actual reason why you heard today numbers around 7%, 7%, 7% was because the state government-owned instrumentality is the one that is suggesting that there is going to be a 6.4% decrease. Now, this is because, of course, it is state-run, it is state-owned, it is not run for profit. But that's the only major down. Let's go to regional New South Wales, where in regional New South Wales on the Essential Energy Network, prices are going to rise. And they're going to be rising by about a point or $22. Meantime, if you are in a small business, you will go up by $41. Now, again, those numbers in and of themselves don't sound like they're going to break a bank, but on top of all of the other stuff that's been there. So in Sydney, it's ever so slightly down. In regional New South Wales, even smaller. In Victoria, it's the only place that goes down, but then you have to be connected, of course, to the state-run system. In regional New South Wales, it goes up, and the same, of course, for small business. Then we can, of course, talk about Queensland. What's happening in southeast Queensland? What's happening everywhere from the Sunshine Coast through to the Gold Coast? Well, I'll tell you exactly what's about to happen. Southeast Queensland power bills are set to increase by $53 a month. Now, again, we have been told how many times that power prices were heading in the wrong direction, and now they're heading in the right direction when they're still going up, or 4/5 of bugger all, in big parts of the country. Now, specifically, the capital of Western Sydney, that being Penrith, their local MP is Melissa McIntosh. Now, she got a new job in the reshuffle of Peter Dutton's shadow ministry, where her job is about affordable energy. And she says that since Labor took office, Western Sydney's been hit hard. This is the whole point. Ms McIntosh said that customers have experienced a cumulative electricity cost of up 37%. So down 0.5, down 3, down 7, down 10 is still a deficit. In fact, about $750 is her estimate about how much more power costs in her electorate, the capital of Western Sydney, the magnificent Penrith. Now, of course, all of this is very different than what you were promised when this government was applying for the job of ruining the country.
Reducing power prices by $275.
By 2025, $275 a year.
$275 a year.
We'll get power prices down by $275 a year.
So, obvious reason, question has to be asked in Parliament. Well, you won't be surprised what the answer is, but the question, it couldn't be clearer. Well done on a little bit here or a little bit there, but the reality is we are still way higher than we were when you came to office.
My question is to the Minister for Climate Change and Energy. This government promised Australians a $275 cut on their electricity bill by 2025. but households in my electorate of Lindsay are owed $1,027 cut to deliver on this promise. Today's release of draft regulated prices for electricity confirm this government's failure to deliver, with annual bills in Western Sydney up 37% on early 2022. Will the minister admit this promise will never be delivered?
Now, we have shown you the Prime Minister walking away pretending that the modelling has all been affected by the Ukraine war. Of course, his policy and promise of $2.75 was announced before the invasion took place. So we knew that this was going to be part of the equation, but they believed that it was just necessary to answer the question that Bill Shorten couldn't, which is, what's the cost of moving from one network that works to the one that makes people feel better? Well, of course, the answer is it was always going to cost more. The cost of putting in $1 trillion worth of changes were going to be handed on to the customer, and that is what has happened. Because while there's not enough renewables to replace what had been knocked over or blown up in things like coal-fired power, the failure to put things like gas into the system meant that what reliable power was still being produced by things like coal-fired power stations would go through the roof because there is so little of it left. For his part, the man who has brought this system to its knees, well, of course, he couldn't dare repeat the promise of $275. And remember, if anyone wants to play fiddle games with the $275, I told you exactly what to do. Find your bill from around May of 2022. Put it on your fridge. If it's $275 lower than that, then you should vote for the Labor Party. If not, by 2025, don't, because this idiot doesn't need any more power.
It is a welcome fact that the honourable member's constituents who are on the Ausgrid network, on the Endeavour Energy network, Mr Speaker, would have received a residential reduction in prices of up to 7%.
Unbelievable. And even if that was true, they're up 37, down 7. Oh, how amazing are we? You promised $275. It was very clear that it was from the day you were elected, $275 down by 2025. I get it, we're only in the first bit of 2024, but nobody believes they're going to achieve it, which of course means they were lying through their teeth, something we absolutely knew back then and have never let them forget. Another example about broken promises comes through today. When the same-sex marriage legislation passed the Parliament, one of the things that was the second shoe to drop was supposedly a move towards increasing religious freedom, codifying the capacity that, essentially, religious organisations would be able to continue to administer their organisations by their own faith. Now, I've always argued that if you also take taxpayers' money, well, then you don't have the ability to say, well, our holy text says that we can't have teachers of a certain sexuality or we must punish students in a certain way. But if you are fully self-sufficient, fully independent, then OK, that's the way the system works. Well, again, the promise was that things like religious schools would be able to stand on their own 2 feet, continue to do things in the name of the faith of which the parents have sent people to those schools. But we learn as late as yesterday that the Prime Minister was trying to get Peter Dutton to agree to absolutely Albo's version of the Religious Freedom Bill. One, of course, that we certainly know would not have religious freedom at the heart of it. Instead, trying to put religious freedom with one hand behind its back. Well, of course, Peter Dutton's not playing along, so guess what? Albo's now not going to present the policy. So despite the fact that, of course, he has a path through the Parliament, he would have a majority support in the lower house, he would be able to go to the upper house, he would be able to go to the Godless Greens, he'd be able to go to Doormat Dave, he'd probably be able to exchange something here or there with Jackie Lambie, and he'd be able to get what he wants. But he says, no, unless the Libs vote for it, I'm not doing it. Which of course means that it is a broken promise. And we're paying attention to those because they gather by the day. Meantime, I want to talk about how some of the little tricks these ministers are using to get around public scrutiny or public accountability for their failures in the ministry. Back to Casanova Bowen. This one matters here. You see, he, of course, found a way to get about $60 billion worth of money that the federal government will use to underwrite renewable projects, but it won't turn up in the budget. It won't add to the budget deficit because he is using the same financial system that established things like the National Broadband Network, which means the $60 billion is still being borrowed from overseas. You just don't get to see it in the budget. Here he is with Penny Sharp, where, of course, it was $1 and a bit billion, was the first of these auctions that had been handed out. But the reality is that, of course, the government is basically now funding the renewable projects that they claimed industry was going to fund. one of their tricks about no accountability. Of course, if they turned around and openly used taxpayer funds, which they are already, but did it through the budget process, well, then, of course, we'd be able to match up all the things they said about how it would be the market, not the government, making the decisions, and then, of course, they'd be caught in another broken promise. So they're still breaking the promise, you just don't get to see the paperwork into how they break the promise. Which brings us to the idiot Andrew Giles, the immigration minister, who I keep calling him by that term because until he proves otherwise, he's earning the title every day. Now, you know that he and clueless Claire O'Neill, rather than letting the one person out of permanent detention that the High Court said should go out, it was all of them go out. First, where they were released with no visas, then it was the wrong visa, then the visa that they ended up on was ruled to be illegal, thanks to some failures of the Gillard, not Abbott, governments back in 2013. Well, now this bloke is trying to work out a way to guarantee that the next run of 150 or so people will not be let out by the High Court. What he's doing is that he is privately settling with each of the complainants before they get to a position where a court will rule and the government will then interpret it as one rule fits everyone. As we see today, there's no plan B in the detention crisis, according to a secret revelation. This was great reporting in the Australian Today from Rosie Lewis. Labor faces call to outline a plan B for dangerous non-citizens who have ankle bracelets and curfew removed amid the several legal challenges on their visa conditions. One barrister saying the Commonwealth had covertly settled at least 3 High Court matters to avoid embarrassing losses. So are we seeing scenarios here where before it gets to the court, before the court makes a decision and then the government has to respond to the decision, they are literally just plucking them out one by one just before they get to the court, which means if you complain, you will eventually be rewarded with citizenship in the country. Honestly, these people, plenty to talk about and plenty of fodder for the opposition on this one.
I would be very surprised if we don't hear tomorrow the answer to the question that we've been asking Minister Giles, and that is, if they lose the next High Court challenge, how many more hardcore criminals will be released into the community? Now, we know it's between 100 and 150. There is no doubt that Minister Giles knows the number that's at threat of being released into the community if they lose this next High Court decision and won't come clean with the Australian people.
Dan Tehan on with Chris Kenny. Remember, primetime starts 5 p.m. Australian Eastern Daylight Time, goes all the way through to Rita at 11 o'clock Australian Eastern Daylight Time. So find your place on the couch, be very comfortable, because everyone's on fire at the moment. Now, let's get to big Australia. We know that the left is obsessed with more people coming here, regardless of the fact that there is already great strain on the systems that we already have. You know that right now, if you call 000, there's a chance no one will turn up if you're in Victoria. You know that if you call 000, there's a chance the ambulance may not turn up in Queensland. You know that in every other state in the country, if an ambulance does turn up, you will actually end up spending hours in the back of the ambulance because there's no room in the hospital. Yet still, the obsession is that we have to bring in way more people because it helps the federal budget. It helps them politically. It does not help the community. It does not help the society. Now, again, for those that are half listening, somebody that's going to run off to a tribunal somewhere, nobody's anti-immigration. Nobody cares about from whence someone comes, as long as obviously they have a peaceful belief in the society that we have here, one that values women, one that is fine with sexual diversity, intellectual diversity, one that puts the laws of the land over the laws of anyone's faith. But it's a simple question about capacity. There are people who get up that little bit earlier each and every year than the year before in order to sit in the traffic that gets a little bit longer to get to the place that they need to go to do their work. God forbid some of them actually do it in utes as well, which I know is just so offensive to some people. Well, Australia's population is not 25 million, it is now 27 million people. How fast these things change. And if you have a look at the Australian Bureau of Statistics and their predictions for mid to high range immigration coming into the country, by 2030 it'll be 29 million people. By 2050 it could be 34 to 38 million people, not 48 million, I apologise. And from 2070 it'll be 39 million to 45.5 million people. Now, of course, we were told by the current people in charge of the system that they got it, that they went a little too hot last year. that too many people came into the country at a time when we all know that the issues from housing to hospitals, all in between, meant that there was a squeeze. So in December of last year, the Prime Minister and clueless Claire O'Neill, they stood up and they announced a brand new decision. Fewer people will come to the country next year than came to the country this year. It was celebrated by, among others, the Turnbull Times, because, of course, why wouldn't they say anything that this government does is amazing? Never check their homework, never double-check their numbers, never find the fine print. Just say whatever the narrative is today. Then follow it up with 28 stories about how evil Peter Dutton is. Well, as we know, December they make the announcement, but in January, 125,000 people came to the country. Literally the next month after saying they were going to shut the door, 125,000 people came in on permanent and long-term arrivals. That is the highest January figure since 2009. Now again, even if you believe these people, and nobody does, but even if you believe these people, it's all okay. We can have all of these people coming in because we'll just keep building new houses. Now, as we all know, that ain't happening. Now, the Prime Minister and Jim Chalmers, seen here in happier times, well, they promised they were going to build 1 million homes within a few years. They'd get together with all of the different state governments and get it happening. Well, let's have a look. How many brand new dwellings were approved in January? 12,850. Let's do the maths, everyone. 125,410 permanent or long-term arrivals come into the country. 12,000 new dwellings, units, townhouses, villas, houses being built. The two don't match. Hence why Peter Dutton threw this one at the PM today.
In January of this year, a record 125,410 visa holders arrived in Australia, far outstripping the housing stock available here in our country. Prime Minister, given permanent and long-term overseas arrivals are outpacing the construction of new homes at a rate of almost 4 to 1, can the Prime Minister tell the House how many new homes or units were built in January?
Now, I know nasty Nikki Sava and the rest of the Praetorian Guard around the Prime Minister say that somehow there's something evil in talking about immigration numbers. Again, I repeat, it's not about from where people come. It's not from what they believe in, as long as when they come to this country they recognise the modern country that values women, that celebrates legitimate diversity, that puts the law of the land above the law of the faith, then I don't care from where anyone comes. No problem about who lives in my street, no problem who lives in your street, right? But there is a legitimate issue here, and good on Peter Dutton for doubling down on it. 125,410 people. 125,410 people. How many houses? 12,850. Honestly. Get their mates in the media. Just keep barrelling on. The biggest problem with Australian politics is Peter Dutton, Peter Dutton. Not the people that are currently running the joint being held accountable by Peter Dutton. Speaking of houses, good news from the Reserve Bank, and I say good news because it's not bad news, but good news is not to continue the pain that we're all been in, anyone who's been paying off a house for the past few years. As you know, the Reserve Bank has kept the cash rate at where it is. Commercial rates ever so a little higher than that, but the whole point is it remains at 4.35%. A dozen interest rate rises since this Prime Minister came to power, but don't mention that. The Reserve Bank Governor, who of course now under the reforms after the ousting of the previous Reserve Bank Governor because, well, he kept putting interest rates up because the government kept spending its money, didn't do anything about trying to cut back spending and thus the stimulation to the economy. No. It had to be the Reserve Bank. It had to be the people paying off their homes who had to do that. People are now having to find anywhere between what's the numbers? $15,000 to $30,000 between a $500,000 loan and $1 million bucks. That's how much you've had to find on top of what you were already paying before Albo became the Prime Minister. But of course, one of the changes they made after the rissoling of Philip Lowe was for his deputy to become the new boss, but the new boss would then have to give press conferences because then it's them who have to answer the curly questions and Grim Jim just gets to swan around in Parliament, where, of course, apparently he was a little bit loose a few years ago, but nobody follows up on what loose means.
What we need to consider a rate cut is really to be much more confident that inflation is coming back into the band. So if we were to see some acceleration and get some more confidence that we are overachieving there, then things possible rate cuts might be something on the agenda, but at the moment, we're not seeing that.
Now, remember, 2 to 3% is where inflation needs to be. Currently, the inflation rate is in the mid to high threes. But, of course, once you start to turn around and have a look at where the different items are that do feed into inflation, well, of course, a lot of those are a lot higher than the average numbers. So inflation, yes, slowly but surely returning, but it has been a very painful time for the past couple of years, and the expectations are that will be for another few months to go. And when it comes to housing, that yes, it's good the rates don't go up, but when the rates remain where they have been, which is the highest in the best part of a generation, there are an awful lot of people that are struggling right now. In fact, more than 250,000 households will roll off the fixed rate loans that they had during the part of the pandemic, and they will go onto the variable loans, which means they're going to go straight through the roof, a dozen times higher, thanks to all of the changes that have happened under this government. By the way, that's on top of the 1.5 million people that are already in mortgage stress. These are the people who literally do not have the right amount of money to be able to pay off their house. Instead, it's less and less money each and every month to pay for everything from school shoes to, food. And when it comes to inflation and the expectation of where that's going to go, because interest rates will start to go down once the Reserve Bank thinks that we are hitting the 2 to 3, or we are landing officially between 2 to 3% inflation, well, we'll all wait and see. But the big four banks say that that's not going to be happening until the back half of this year. The Prime Minister, of course, will desperately hope that that's the case, because he's planning at least an election as soon as he can after the too little too late tax cuts come in on July the 1st. So if something happens around August and they've put all their ducks in the row, that will be what might happen. Also, if the Prime Minister would like to do anything about inflation between now and then, he could do what we've been talking about for about a full year now, cut petrol tax. This is the bloke who, remember, when he took over, 23 cents in the dollar. Now, 49 cents in the dollar. They want to do something about inflation, feel free to cut back on the tax that they get, meaning people will be able to save a little bit of extra money or stretch the $0.50 that they have left over. Now, part of the getting their ducks in the row for a potential election means that any government, when it starts to fiddle around with the electoral system, it's kind of the last thing you do before you start the process of going off to an election. Now, of course, I have no idea when he's actually going to do it, but if you're fiddling around with the election system at the first half of the year, it would kind of signal you want to do something in the second half of the year. Now, of course, you can wait until 2025. We'll all wait and see together. But Don Farrell is the Special Minister of State. Don Farrell is the Senator from South Australia. Don Farrell is the bloke who happened to have said in the Parliament yesterday that New Zealand, not the United States, is our closest ally.
I'm not sure that the United States is our most trusted ally. I would have said New Zealand in the whole history of time. The whole history of time is our... Yes, yeah. Now, I would say... Order.
Seriously. Of course, it has nothing to do with the Foreign Minister of China coming to this country in the next couple of days. It's just been in New Zealand today. Of course, that'd be no reason why we'd talk down our relationship with the United States, would it? Of course, this is the same Don Farrell, who is the man who broke the government's promise about no jobs for mates. Instead, of course, he took a one-term senator who nobody had ever heard of and gave a plum job as sort of like an assistant ambassador, a consul general and a trade envoy based out of San Francisco. That bloke didn't even apply for the job. In fact, the woman who did apply for the job and was told was the candidate for the job is the one who's had to train that bloke, who's the political appointee of Don Farrell. This is Don Farrell, the man who is oh so powerful when it comes to Australian politics. But he is the one who has suggested that we should increase the number of politicians that we have. Why would that be? Because, of course, as the godfather of the Senate, he would like to be able to get more lefty votes for the government in the Senate, or if at some point in time the Labor Party lost the numbers in the lower house, any future government would be blocked by an increased number of Greens and Teals out of the ACT and the Northern Territory. This is the bloke who is now doing the fiddling with the electoral system. He is the one who would like to see a scenario where Unions, of course, which are 50% of the constitution of the Labor Party. They pick the candidates, they set the policies. They are, of course, the political arm, the Australian Labor Party, of the union movement. Not breaking any news there. But he wants to have a system where donation caps exist and spending caps exist, where political parties would be limited about what they can spend in a seat, but each and every union is completely separate. Completely separate. Meaning, of course, there's a 2, 3, 4, 5, 25 to 1 advantage in favour of the Labor Party over anyone else on the ballot paper. Forget the Libs. I'm talking about everything from One Nation, UAP, the Greens, the Victorian Socialists. Now, the Teal MPs have come forward today to suggest what their plan is, and their plan is that no more billionaires should be able to spend big money backing in Australian politics. Of course, that's slightly awkward because they're all Simon's Angels, aren't they? Climate 200 or whatever it was called. Now, the bill that they want promises to lower the donation disclosure threshold to $1,000 in real-time disclosures within 5 business days. I don't have a problem with that. The technology exists. That, of course, we should know who's donating, and it should be in real time, not 12 months later. But I think the same should apply to the travel expenses of politicians, including the Teals. We're still only learning about what's happening in 2022. No idea on what they did in 2023. But interestingly, the Teal idea excludes a recommendation from the Electoral Matters Committee to cap spending on elections after concerns from the Climate 200 fundraising body that this could effectively entrench the two major parties. You see, what they would like to do is they would still like to be able to buy their way to an electoral result. They would just like to put one hand behind the back of anyone who wants to donate to anything but the Teals. Of course, maybe the Teals would then have to be forced to go and do what they normally do, which is get a free plug on taxpayer television over and over and over and over and over again. When all else fails, let's quickly check in with the Teal. Free advertising here. Of course, Dialee's not a Teal. I don't know why she appears in that, but you get the point. Now, let's talk here about Queensland, because there are some big things I want to talk about in Queensland tonight. Now, of course, the Premier of Queensland, Giggles Miles, well, he's had that giggle wiped off his face after the results that took place on Sunday in that by-election. Thank goodness the people did so. Now Labor MPs are apparently having a crack at the former Premier, Palaszczuk, saying that she should have gone earlier. But there is one hell of a mess happening in Queensland right now with the Olympic Games. Now, remember, Brisbane got the Olympic Games after literally nobody else was bidding for them. At the height of COVID, this was a plan from the then Labor Premier to basically come up with a legacy that either she would run as the Premier or presumably she would end up being part of the organising committee, because once you're on that gravy train of the Olympics, it's a little bit like the defence industry. Once you're sort of in that system, you're in it forever and you have to advise the next games and the next games and the next games after that. Now, the original plan was that the Gabba was going to be knocked down, was going to be rebuilt. That would be about $3 billion. Now, nobody understood why that was the policy or the plan. The Gabba is not that old. It has most recently been renovated, and the reality is it's a 2-week sporting festival that everyone moves on from. A permanent legacy for Brisbane would be a better public transport network, as opposed to a stadium that, OK, one day down the track you might do something with, but there's no need to do it now. Stephen Miles, upon becoming the Premier, knew that there was quite a political problem with knocking down and rebuilding a $3 billion stadium, apart from the fact that this is an area of Brisbane where the Greens are getting particularly popular and could entrench themselves at the next state election, and every single seat counts. So the plan to get rid of the public school next to the Gabba was going to cause troubles. So he went and said, let's go back to the drawing board. He suggested, I'm going to hire the former Lord Mayor of Brisbane, Graham Quirk, and he can decide how much we're going to spend and on what.
And so that's why we've asked Graham Quirk and 2 other experts to look at that decision. And if they say to me that there is an alternative which still allows us to put on the best games ever, but allows us to put some of those funds into other projects that are higher priorities for Queenslanders, then that's what I want to do. That's what I want to achieve.
Please vote for me because I've got a Brisbane Heat hat on. Please vote for me. I've got the Maroons hat on and you're that stupid. No, of course people are not. Well, the report came back and the report said, yeah, you should probably knock down and rebuild the Gabba, but he's decided, no, I'm not going to do that anyway. because he knows how politically unpopular it is. You see, nobody wanted the Olympics in Brisbane. They're glad that they've got them, but nobody was saying this was the future for Australia. Instead, during the pandemic, as a way of being able to try to forward build their political legacy, to be able to hold on to a 4th, 5th, 6th term in office, that's the only reason that Queensland got the Games, or went for the Games, because remember, nobody was bidding for them. Well, the decision of Stephen Miles in the past 24 hours is to no longer knock down, rebuild the Gabba. Instead, it is to resurrect the old QE2 stadium that was there from the 1980s Commonwealth Games and the first couple of seasons of the Brisbane Broncos. Now, nobody goes to this stadium. No one will go to this stadium because if Taylor Swift's going to be playing, she'll be playing at Suncorp Stadium. If the AFL Grand Final's going to be played, it's going to be played at the Gabba. If there's going to be the Matildas turning up again to finish 4th in a World Cup, it'll be at Suncorp Stadium. There is no need to do what they're about to do here. And even then, there is no plan to spend any money on serious public transport infrastructure to get tens of thousands of people each and every day to go to and from the part-time stadium. In fact, Stephen Miles says it's just buses.
It's likely to be a rapid bus interchange, but I want to work with City Council to see if there's a way, for example, for it to integrate into their metro system.
But then again, let's have the report. I'm going to ignore the report. I'm going to do what John Coates tells me that I have to do. And of course, John Coates, IOC Vice President, known as the man who helped put together the Sydney Olympics, right? But to and from and back and forth and buses and all the rest of it. But guess what Channel 9 revealed in Queensland tonight? They were going to cancel the Games.
I can reveal the Queensland government sought advice and considered cancelling the Brisbane 2032 Olympic Games. Amidst controversy and public backlash over stadium plans, including the knockdown and rebuild of the Gabba, the government asked for advice about the potential cost and legal fallout involved in abandoning the Games.
Queensland, Queensland, Queensland. I've said it before, I say it again. Get rid of this mob. Seriously, they invented the Olympics as a distraction. It's now going to cost you billions of dollars. You'll have 4/5 of bugger all left over. And even then, if they cancel the Games, it'd still cost you $500 million. Flush them. Get rid of them. I look forward to it towards the end of the year. Quick break. Back with more. Thank you so much for watching, very patiently waiting because I had a fair amount to say, including, what about Brisbane? Brisbane and this idiot Labor government actually thinking about seriously cancelling the Olympic Games, right on top of course, Andrews and his... Anyway, let's discuss this and a whole lot more with Hollie Hughes, the Liberal Senator from New South Wales. Lovely to see her. And of course, Shadow Minister extraordinaire, and none other than the great future Shadow Minister, but now, an unofficial advisor.
I'm the shadow government.
No doubt. The puppet master.
I don't know what you are, Joe, but
They'd be going so much better if I was the puppet master. If I was the puppet master, everything would be fine.
I was going to say, a couple of strings are missing at the moment, including, let's talk about Sherry Markson's excellent exclusive last night. She's doubled down with something again on it tonight, which is that ASIO and ASIS, the chief intelligence agencies of Australia, no longer permanently invited to be part of the National Security Committee of Federal Cabinet. Now, they had been permanent members right up until this point in time, all the way from John Howard all the way through to the start of this administration, but then they've decided to boot them out of the room. Only when required will they be there. But then Sherry dropped another bit of detail today about who is in the room when they are not in the room.
The opposition has today demanded answers from the government over our revelation last night that the heads of ASIO and ASIS have been kicked out of the National Security Committee of Cabinet. We revealed that ASIO head Mike Burgess and ASIS chief Kerry Hartland are no longer permanent members of the National Security Committee of Cabinet. And while ASIO and ASIS are on the outer, tonight I can reveal that there's a new attendee to the National Security Committee of Cabinet, and that is the Climate Change Department Secretary, David Fredericks. That's right. It seems that climate change is in, while ASIO and ASIS are out.
Now, Hollie, if this Prime Minister was a little bit more like Donald Trump, I'd understand. You know, he doesn't want the deep state anywhere near him. He doesn't want the intelligence agencies in and around things. But the reality is that this is a very bizarre decision, and I've got to say it's got a little bit of an echo of the character assessment that the former Prime Minister Paul Keating has put into the mix. Do we have him at the National Press Club talking about his, well, lack of deep faith in, among others, the boss of ASIO? No, we don't. I'll act it out for you. Yeah. All right. Let's
That's
get to
right.
this.
I can answer on Hollie's behalf. She was going to say that she recants all previous opposition to the Albanese Labor government. It's in fact doing a fantastic job. Who cares about $275 anyway?
I thought we were waiting for Paul Keating.
You were waiting for Paul Keating.
I thought we were waiting for Paul Keating. I didn't want to interrupt Paul as he once again interfered in international relations.
All right. Let's get to this decision. What do you think about the decision to boot these
current
people?
government?
Hollie?
I mean, I think it is appalling on both fronts. It is appalling that ASIO and ACES have been excluded from the room. I think it's absolutely bizarre and disgraceful that they're now looking to David Fredericks. If for no other reason, up until recently, I was on Environment and Communications. I sat in with Mr Fredericks on every estimate, and if they think he's going to provide any great insight to national security, I can assure you there was no great insight provided during the estimates process. So, I mean, it is farcical. But the frightening thing is this government is putting our sovereignty and our security at risk with every decision they are making. And they are obviously so frightened of the Greens with this pandering to climate change in every decision. It is obscene. And it beggars belief. It feels like an episode of Yes, Prime Minister combined with the original House of Cards. You know, it's just beyond the pale.
Now, Joe, I want to think here, and just to explain to people, and again, obviously Peter Credlin, ultimate person on this network, talking about how these things work, right? But an example of sort of how permanent advice to government can sometimes get a little bit skewy, right? Yep. Which is, say, during lockdowns, right? The Chief Health Officer was constantly sitting there with the New South Wales Premier or the Victorian Premier and basically constantly going, every time it started to look, it was okay, there'd be some data they'd throw up, oh, there's some COVID in the toot water on the south coast. So everyone must stay.
Has anyone seen Brett Sutton recently, by the way?
No,
is he at the bottom of the Yarra?
No, I'm sure he's happy and winning awards by the day.
Happy as can be in his little padded cell.
So if there's a benefit of the doubt, which I don't want to give the government, but still, if there's a benefit of the doubt, then something has broken in the relationship, all right? However, we haven't heard about that. They haven't come out and explained any of that.
I think we have heard about it, and I think it's hidden in plain sight. Okay. I think... I don't know. This is just my speculation, just knowing how these things work generally. But firstly, the head of ASIO and ACES is Mike Burgess. We all know that he gave that very controversial or certainly headline-grabbing speech to the National Press Club where he talked about how an Australian politician had been compromised by China and was prepared to sell out his own country. Now, immediately everyone assumed that it was a Labor MP. Most people assumed it was the wrong Labor MP, but I'll get to that later. And immediately everyone assumed it was China. I think both assumptions are correct, but he never said it was a federal MP. I believe it was a state MP who has previously... And we're not going to go there. But to be clear about this, this MP was exonerated. This MP was cleared of any criminal wrongdoing. He was briefly suspended from the Labor Party and then reinstated, and then did not contest the last election that he was there. I don't know if he would have had much choice about that, but that's where it stands. So, in a sense, this person was unfairly maligned, even though he was not named. But certainly, at a time when the government was on the ropes, it had had a shocker of 2023. It was trying to reset the agenda for 2024 out of nowhere, and indeed, even the most hardened kind of cynical journos were amazed that the boss of ASIO would start just wading into politics and drop this big speculative rock in the puddle. I think the government said, for no reason whatsoever, you have come out, blindsided us by effectively dropping us in it, because even though you didn't actually say who it was, everyone thought it was a Labor MP, because Labor has those closer links with China. And you've now made the role political.
But then why not, if it's that bad, sack him?
But
now,
why
I know there's an opportunity for that.
Why put Fredericks on?
They may,
but why?
Well, I don't
but then how does the climate change bloke come in?
I don't know
Yeah,
if the climate change blokes is now a permanent member of the council or whether he's just been invited to address it. Mike Burgess can still come on and address the committee. It's just that he's not a permanent member.
Right, so you think there's a little
again, there should be a permanent member because it means you're able to give more fearless advice because you're not worried about whether you're going to get an encore performance. But I think if I know politics like I know politics, and maybe I don't at all, but I reckon the government would have been absolutely furious about Mike Burgess's intervention, sullying or muddying the waters when in fact there wasn't really a case for it, making it look like federal Labor was corrupt or compromised by China,
So
when in
Joe,
fact it wasn't. And I reckon
you're
they thought,
saying
no, mate, you can't be trusted anymore. You are outside the circle of trust, you're outside the tent.
No suggestion about specific
But this guy, you're now saying we're not going to put...
but
not going to put the view forward. Seriously, put national security at risk because he may have politically embarrassed them. I mean, honestly, this is a big boys club. This is the real deal here. We're talking about national security, border security, our sovereignty. We know, and we know, all of us know, that we are at risk of espionage, that there are foreign interference and players coming into Australia. But because these guys are now, oh, boo-hoo, you made a political comment. Let me tell you, David Fredericks, who they've just asked to come on one of his very first, if it wasn't his first appearance at Estimates, after being appointed to the role, I asked him a question where he said, when we won government, and I said, excuse me, Mr Fredericks? He said, actually, when the Labor Party won government. Was that a Freudian slip? You want to talk about playing politics? These guys are direct political appointments, if we want to go through the secretaries. Are we going to start getting them all on national security because they're political appointees? That is disgusting.
I think if you're politicised in favour of the government, that's obviously not a reason that you're going to get suspended from the government's advisory committees. But
when we're talking about national security, everyone should be above it.
Well, again, right.
I think they would think that
should Mike Burgess have done what he did? No. Should Mike Burgess have done what he did? No, because he was in Estimates a week or two before. If he'd had concerns, he should have delivered that at Estimates when he had parliamentary privilege, and he could have completely said what he needed to say. But to do it the way he did, I think was inappropriate.
That's right, and I think that is why I think they think he can no longer be trusted based on that. But
he's up at the end of the year.
Yeah, well, that's
They're bringing him back when they replace him with another apparatchik.
I reckon.
Are we going to put Andrew Giles in, maybe?
Oh, God, no! Stop giving me nightmares.
He's a competence.
I already suffer from anxiety,
Joe, my heart breaks for you. Mate, my heart breaks for you. How you can defend this mob, mate, I got no idea.
They were putting someone in. Well, I think, as you've agreed, I think it was very indiscreet of Mike Burgess. Obviously,
but
we all
again,
love
this is. Look, I understand. Look,
but you've got to be bigger than that when you're talking about national security.
Let's line it up here, right? Oh, the boss of the Reserve Bank doesn't do what we want to do. All right, then quick, we'll get rid of them.
Yeah,
right?
We'll get a new one.
We'll get rid of them. The boss of ASIO turns around and yes, takes it to the next level. But let's be honest too, and I'm no fan of the deep state, right? As the Americans would say. I mean, how many times? I mean, it's not like it's secret. We know that the emails of the Parliament had been hacked. We know that China has literally the blueprints to the ASIO headquarters. How many times it had been mentioned before about the susceptibility of certain individuals here? So yes, he took it to the next level. But that being, the be-all, end-all, please. And also, wasn't it fascinating today to, again, all of those people whose job it is to talk about politics all day, every day? Why was it only this organisation that was talking about the story that was about who was sitting around the cabinet of the National Security Committee? Now, we'll all find out, of course, no doubt in a couple of weeks, our Media Watch will somehow debunk the story. But the reality is that the reporting...
We'll wait for the Four Corners expose.
Correct. The reporting was clear, absolute, and a perfect example that if it's reported by somebody else, bang, it's the front page everywhere else. Well, when it comes out of here, let's keep it down as low as possible for as long as possible.
I'm sure the government would have wasted no time in saying Sky News is completely...
Well, correct, and they didn't deny it all day, which means... Correct. True story, good reporting, no question. All right, quick break, back with more, lots to talk about. Busy night tonight, bit of pepper in the air, and we like that. Thanks very much for watching. Here with Hollie Hughes, here with Joe Hildebrand. Got the late debate coming up in less than 10 minutes. So we've got plenty of time to talk about the big issues of the day, including we know that the Greens would like to see the major supermarkets broken up, suggesting the big companies are literally too big. I was fascinated to see today that Bunnings is going to be an organisation that will be pulled before the Senate committee because independent nurseries believe that they are too big, too strong when it comes to the capacity to control the plant market. I know, yes, that's what our Parliament's talking about, but it is people's businesses, and just as local hardware stores have basically been blown away, same's happening to some degree with nurseries. But there seems to be the Nationals and the Greens in the same place, which is about maybe getting towards the place where you start to break these things up. Now, I noticed today in question time the Prime Minister was having great fun with this, Joe, but does anyone honestly think that this government's going to turn around and pass a law that's going to go anywhere near breaking up these?
Yeah, I don't think it can politically, and I'm not necessarily sure that it wants to, both politically and economically as well. Although I do know that Alan Fells thinks that there should be these divestment powers there. So I think yes, give them the powers, but I would use them. I would treat them almost as reserve powers, like just
a stick that you can always point at but never pick up.
A stick that is always holstered, but that people know is there. A couple of obvious things that even an art student like me can figure out. If there is the prospect of the government being able to come in and break up your business at any time for whatever reason, what is that going to do to investment? What is that going to do to businesses starting up? Secondly, the problem is that these nurseries are absolutely right about Bunnings, just as the corner shop is right about supermarkets. They do destroy these smaller businesses because they can apply economies of scale and they can provide goods that are incredibly cheap. And what is the one thing we desperately need at the moment? It's goods that are incredibly cheap. Sadly, not as much as they used to be. So I think the benefit for the consumer, as long as they're not exploiting the duopoly and behaving like a sort of cartel and which we have seen
But also, don't forget, your power as a consumer, all right? Like we always hear this, Hollie, constantly, right, about Australians will always whinge about a Big Four bank but not go anywhere else. Well, of course, to be a bank, you're under the exact same legal responsibilities as those Big Four banks. Again, if you want to go to another hardware store, if you want to go to another supermarket, if you want to buy your fruit and veg somewhere else, I get why. And again, I'm not going to pretend that I don't go to these things like everyone else. But if this really is line in the sand for you, go and find a way around them. But it's interesting if the Nats and the Greens are in the same place, Senator.
Yeah, look, I'm not a big fan of divestiture powers. I think it's very, very dangerous economically to start looking at these things. I mean, competition is always a good thing, but you are right when you say as the consumer, you have the power to go where you want to go. I think we do have more, there are more competitors in the supermarket space, whether you look at the Superbarns or the Costcos or, we've always had the IGAs. And maybe if you are concerned about it, you do start to take your dollars elsewhere. But at the end of the day, we are a pretty small market. This is we're not that big a country and we are so diversely spread that there does need to be some consideration given. And I feel for the farmers because the prices they are getting at the farm gate are certainly not reflected with what we're paying in the supermarket. But I know even the other day I did try to go to a butcher and I ended up getting a phone call from one of the children and had to leave before I walked in, and so happened to go to the supermarket closer to home. But I'd seen the price of the leg of lamb in the butcher window and then the price of the leg of lamb at the supermarket, and we are talking there was about a $50 difference.
Yeah, it's uncanny.
So, wherever that price differential is, it is substantial at the moment, and I can understand why in a cost of living crisis, families are looking for the cheapest possible alternative.
Well, that's all right. The bloke who shut down Grocery Watch, Craig Emerson, who'll fix it all, as well as apparently being a commentator in the financial...
Oh, mate, that's what we need, another
go to their bespoke delicatessen.
Just fix up a website.
Yeah, correct. All right, thank you guys. Do appreciate it. We'll see you all again next week. Thank you. Quick break, back with more. Less than 5 minutes now to the late debate, but guess what? Apparently we know who the next James Bond's going to be. I know I did this last night, but apparently it's like almost official. Next. Sorry, lots of talking, so we're heading into the late debates time. But Aaron Taylor-Johnson, an actor who apparently is an actor, is going to be the next James Bond. I haven't heard of him either, but good luck to him.